I learned that song like 2 days before I performed it live. Oh my gosh, and I about puked every time I performed on the show. It was just...
When Darci Lynne Farmer stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage in 2017, she looked like any other shy 12-year-old girl. But within seconds, she shattered every expectation and rewrote AGT history. Standing nervously with her puppet Petunia, Darci didn't just perform, she dominated. Her flawless ventriloquism, pitch-perfect vocals, and comedic timing stunned the judges, silenced the audience, and instantly went viral. Simon Cowell called her the best live audition he had ever seen, and Mel B, overwhelmed with emotion, slammed the golden buzzer without hesitation. It wasn't just talent, it was a seismic moment that reignited public interest in ventriloquism and transformed Darci into a national sensation overnight. But what viewers didn't see was the trembling underneath her smile, the breath holding backstage, and the silent battle against her own social anxiety just to walk onto that stage. Behind the confidence of her puppet was a little girl using performance as a shield. She once admitted in an interview, "I was terrified of talking to people, but with a puppet, it felt like it wasn't really me." That statement would later become symbolic, not just of her act, but of the emotional armor she was forced to wear as fame exploded around her. Overnight, she was trending on YouTube, headlining morning shows, and getting calls from Hollywood executives. But inside, Darci was already cracking under the weight of attention she wasn't prepared for. Her dazzling debut masked a deeper truth. She wasn't just performing for a crowd, she was performing strength. And while the world celebrated her as a child prodigy, Darci was quietly bracing herself for a ride she never truly signed up for. This wasn't just a win, it was the beginning of a high-pressure spotlight that would follow her for years. But that night, it was magic, and no one, not even Darci, understood what it would cost her. Long before the stage lights and standing ovations, Darci Lynne was just a quiet girl from Oklahoma who found the outside world terrifying. Her parents described her as painfully shy, often hiding behind her mother's legs or avoiding eye contact in group settings. Class presentations were nightmares, and birthday parties felt overwhelming. But everything changed the moment she discovered a puppet. Ventriloquism, to most, is an odd talent, but for Darci, it became a life raft. The moment she slipped on a puppet, it was as if her voice finally had permission to be heard. In interviews, she confessed, "The puppet says everything I'm too scared to say." It wasn't just a hobby, it was a coping mechanism. Her earliest performances weren't about applause, they were about survival. By letting her puppet speak for her, she could express humor, joy, and even sarcasm, emotions she was too anxious to show on her own. But while this artistic outlet helped her cope with social anxiety, it also set up a complex emotional paradox. The more the world praised her for being funny and charismatic on stage, the more she feared they wouldn't like the real her without the puppet. Her identity blurred between the performer and the person, and the lines became dangerously thin. She once hinted in a blog post, "People think I'm confident because of my act, but I still freeze up at school." Behind the stage presence was a young girl trapped between needing the spotlight and being terrified of it. Teachers noticed she avoided group activities. Friends said she was warm in small groups, but shut down in crowds. As her fame grew, so did the expectations, and the silent pressure to always be on. The very thing that helped her cope with anxiety was now pushing her deeper into it. And while the audience laughed along with her puppets, few realized that every performance was also a quiet act of bravery. But what happened when the mask stopped working, and the girl behind the puppet couldn't hide anymore? When Darci Lynne clinched the AGT crown at just 12 years old, her world didn't just change, it exploded. Almost overnight, the soft-spoken girl from Oklahoma became a global sensation. Television networks lined up interviews, talk shows begged for appearances, and tour dates filled her calendar faster than she could keep up. One day, she was a middle schooler in a quiet neighborhood. The next, she was juggling press junkets, stage rehearsals, and commercial deals, all while trying to finish homework between flights. What looked like a dream from the outside was a whirlwind behind the scenes. She performed on Ellen, headlined a sold-out national tour, and even scored her own Christmas special, all within a year of winning. But the relentless pace wasn't just exhausting, it was suffocating. Every smile had to be picture perfect, every response media trained. Friends from home struggled to relate, while new industry peers were often twice her age. Her family tried to maintain balance, but the machine around her had already taken over. In interviews, Darci later admitted she was overwhelmed, but didn't want to let anyone down. "I thought if I slowed down, people would forget me," she said. The pressure to maintain that bubbly, flawless public image only grew stronger. Even when she was sick or sad, the show had to go on. And for a young girl still figuring out who she was, being told what to wear, what to say, and how to act became quietly damaging. There was no roadmap for being America's youngest ventriloquist superstar, and no manual for protecting your mental health when millions expect you to stay exactly as they remember you. Darci was living in a spotlight that offered no shade, and though she kept smiling for the cameras inside, the toll was mounting. The fame she once dreamed of had now become a full-time performance she couldn't escape. But the cracks were forming, and the collapse was coming faster than anyone expected. Beneath the lights, applause, and perfectly choreographed puppet routines, Darci Lynne was crumbling, and no one saw it coming. As her fame soared, so did the emotional toll, until the pressure became too heavy to mask behind a puppet smile. In quiet moments between tours and press appearances, Darci began experiencing severe anxiety, bouts of panic, and what she later referred to as emotional crashes that left her feeling hollow. While fans saw a girl living her dream, she was silently unraveling, afraid to speak up for fear of seeming ungrateful or weak. In a rare and vulnerable interview years later, she revealed, "There were days I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't know who I was without the puppets." The act that once gave her voice now trapped her in a persona that felt increasingly distant from her true self. Family members noticed changes, withdrawal, exhaustion, sudden mood shifts, but Darci insisted she was fine. She wasn't. Behind closed doors, she battled a mental fog that clouded her joy, questioning whether she even wanted to perform anymore. Friends close to the situation said she would burst into tears after shows, then pull herself together for meet and greets, terrified of disappointing the fans who saw her as a role model. The contrast between her public image and private reality grew unbearable. Rumors of a breakdown surfaced quietly in fan forums, sparked by canceled appearances and a noticeable absence from social media. Insiders whispered about therapy, emotional burnout, and even a close call where Darci reportedly considered walking away from entertainment entirely. While no official statement confirmed the severity, her silence spoke volumes. The girl who once brought puppets to life was now struggling to keep herself from emotionally shutting down. Her story was no longer just about talent, it was about survival. And in a world obsessed with smiles, Darci's pain remained hidden behind the very act that made her famous. But the mask was slipping, and soon, the world would learn just how deep her silent struggle really ran. As Darci Lynne's popularity soared, so did the pressure from the entertainment industry to capitalize on her success, and fast. While fans admired the charming ventriloquist with a golden buzzer legacy, insiders say she was increasingly treated less like a child and more like a commercial asset. Behind the smiles and upbeat performances, Darci was reportedly being nudged into relentless branding deals, merchandise launches, and aggressive tour schedules that left little time for rest or reflection. According to sources close to the situation, industry executives viewed her as a once-in-a-generation marketable act, and every minute off stage was considered a missed opportunity. From branded puppet lines to licensing talks and syndication offers, the pressure to monetize every aspect of her persona grew suffocating. Former collaborators hinted that Darci rarely had full control over her creative direction, with adult managers making critical choices while she nodded quietly in interviews. But perhaps the most damaging part wasn't the business, it was the isolation. Darci, who already struggled with shyness, found herself increasingly cut off from childhood friends who couldn't relate to her fame. On tour, she was surrounded by adults and team members who treated her like a professional, not a teenager. Birthday parties became hotel room celebrations. Friendships faded into text messages, and the girl who once found joy in performing now found herself questioning whether she even liked what she was doing. One anonymous source even claimed she became in 2023. Concern among Darci Lynne's most loyal fans reached a fever pitch as the young star suddenly vanished from the spotlight without explanation. Show dates were quietly postponed. Her social media posts slowed to a trickle, and even her previously active YouTube channel went silent. While no official statement was released at the time, whispers began to spread. Rumors of a private health battle that insiders described as both physical and emotional. Some speculated she was dealing with a severe case of burnout, while others pointed to signs of deeper distress. Fan forums lit up with theories ranging from eating disorders to prolonged anxiety-related shutdowns, citing noticeable weight fluctuations and an increasingly withdrawn demeanor in her few public appearances. One fan-compiled timeline even noted a gap of nearly 5 months, where Darci made no verifiable public appearances, a stark contrast for someone who once seemed omnipresent across stages and screens. Meanwhile, those closest to her remained tight-lipped, fueling speculation that something serious was unfolding behind the scenes. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Darci returned, not with a flashy performance, but with a deeply emotional vlog titled, "I Owe You My Truth." In it, she sat in front of a plain background, no makeup, no puppet, just raw honesty. Fighting back tears, she described going through what she called the darkest time of my life, alluding to emotional trauma and a loss of identity that left her feeling completely adrift. Though she never used clinical terms, her message was clear. She had reached a breaking point. The pressure, the expectations, the loneliness, it had all caught up. She spoke candidly about struggling with self-worth, experiencing emotional breakdowns, and stepping away from everything just to survive. Her words hit like a thunderclap. "I didn't know who I was without the applause." That confession stunned fans and confirmed what many feared. Darci hadn't just been taking a break. She'd been fighting to save herself. The girl who once dazzled America had spent a year learning how to breathe again. And though she was beginning to heal, the damage was already done. But what she chose to do next would silence every critic and inspire a new wave of respect. When Darci Lynne finally reemerged after months of silence, she didn't return with a puppet on her arm or a stage beneath her feet. She returned with purpose, vulnerability, and a message that few saw coming. In 2024, she quietly began appearing in school workshops, mental health panels, and low-profile speaking events, not as a celebrity, but as a survivor. Gone was the sparkly stage persona America had come to adore, replaced by a more grounded, reflective young woman who had lived through a silent storm. Darci spoke softly but powerfully about the invisible weight of fame, the pressure to please, and the toll that years of performing happiness had taken on her. She never mentioned exact diagnoses or specifics, but her candor struck a chord. "I used to think people only loved me when I was funny," she said at one panel. "But now I know real strength is sharing your truth, even when it's messy." With that quiet declaration, Darci began reshaping her identity, not as a ventriloquist prodigy, but as a symbol of resilience for a generation drowning in expectations. She started supporting youth mental health initiatives, using her platform to advocate for therapy, emotional literacy, and the importance of setting boundaries in a world that demands constant performance. She visited schools, sometimes anonymously, to connect with students battling anxiety. In one particularly emotional podcast appearance, she revealed, "There were times I thought stepping away meant I failed, but it saved me." Fans were stunned, not by scandal, but by maturity. Darci was no longer chasing the next stage or viral moment. She was chasing something far more rare: authenticity. Though she hinted at returning to entertainment someday, she made it clear, if she did, it would be on her terms, with her voice, and for the right reasons. No longer a puppet to anyone's expectations, Darci began quietly inspiring others to speak up, step back, and heal. And while the mainstream media may not have covered her return in flashy headlines, those who listened understood. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a reckoning. But her journey wasn't over yet, because a final chapter reveals where she is now and what she hopes the world finally understands. Today, Darci Lynne stands not on the AGT stage, but in a place far more powerful, her own truth. Now in her late teens, she's chosen to redefine what success means, not by trophies or tours, but by inner peace. After years of being molded into the perfect child star, Darci has quietly stepped away from the industry spotlight and into a season of healing and reinvention. She still sings, still writes music, and occasionally performs, but only when it feeds her soul, not a media machine. Her recent Instagram posts are a far cry from the polished studio shots of her early fame. They're raw, simple, often captioned with reflections about growth, self-worth, and learning to let go. She hasn't completely abandoned performance, but she's made it clear that any future in entertainment will be guided by her values, not contracts or clickbait. In private conversations, friends say she's exploring music beyond ventriloquism, possibly working on a stripped-down acoustic album that tells her story in her own words. Meanwhile, she continues supporting mental health initiatives, recently partnering with a nonprofit focused on anxiety in youth performers. When asked if she misses the old days, she gave a soft smile and said, "I miss the joy before it got complicated." That one sentence speaks volumes. Darci doesn't resent her past, but she's no longer defined by it. She's spoken about how fame can trap young stars in a version of themselves that no longer exists, and her goal now is to show others that it's okay to evolve, to rest, to say no. The girl once praised for giving voice to puppets is now using her own voice to rewrite the narrative for every child star forced to smile through silent pain. Her journey, filled with applause and agony, teaches one unforgettable truth. Even those who bring the world laughter can be quietly breaking inside. And Darci hopes that if you take anything away from her story, it's this: fame doesn't always mean fulfillment, and sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is walk away to find themselves again.